Welcome everybody to the International Evening Meeting at the quote-unquote virtual United Nations. Today is December 16, 2020. This will be a recorded meeting. We are honored by the presence of the most esteemed Honorable Deputy Consul Wolfram von Heinitz, who was so kindly invited by our equally respected and esteemed member Olaf Schmüser from Commerzbank. We have the pleasure of the presence of true Rotary loyalty like Josef Klee, also German himself. So welcome, Joseph. We have Miklos Gornagi from the Hungarian consulate here today. He's, I believe, the trade attaché. And many others, of course, Trustee Scarlett Bildes, Board Member Dr. George Onuora, and others are coming in right now, and past President Wilfred Wilkinson. That all said, I will pass the word to our President, Honorable Judge Gerard Schriffen, for his opening remarks, and then Olaf Schmüser will introduce our speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andreas. I appreciate that very much. And welcome, everyone. Welcome to the 111th year of Rotary Club of New York. The Host Club of America. We're very honored tonight. Normally on the third Wednesday of the month, we have a United Nations breakfast. Due to a lot of different complications this week, it's in the evening, which is fine by us. I will tell you that there will be a number of, we have a number of contacts, friends, Rotarians in the Rotary Club of London and in Munich and in the Far East, and they will be able to view this later, the recording. So it's my honor tonight to present one of our esteemed members, Olaf Schmüser, who will do the honor of introducing our guest this evening. So Olaf, it's yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. President. I have the pleasure to introduce to you Wolfram von Heinitz, who is currently the Deputy Consul General of Germany here in New York. Wolfgang, prior to his assignment here, was head of the cyber policy coordination staff of the German Federal Foreign Office, a member of the group of governmental experts on advancing responsible state behavior in cyberspace, convened in 2019 by the UN Secretary General Guterres, and a member of the ad hoc committee on artificial intelligence of the Council of Europe. In this position, he was also responsible for the recently published recommendation for the future of digital cooperation, which Germany and the UAE undertook at the request of the UN. Previous position included term as a research commissioner of the German Federal Foreign Office and a member of its policy planning staff, specializing in cyber policy, cybersecurity, and in the face of emerging challenges, the development of future direction and strategies for the Foreign Office. He also has served as a head of the division for foresight in the Ministry UE Enlargement Division, as a political counsel in the German Embassy in Tel Aviv, dealing with the Middle East peace process and Israel interior politics, in the private office of the Minister of European Affairs, and in the office of the Federal President of Germany. Wolfram was also posted as deputy head of the mission to Ireland and Azerbaijan, and maybe I can disclose he's married to the Irish, to an Irish lady, which is becoming the general counsel here in New York. Before joining the Foreign Service, Wolfram graduated from the Université Paris-Sorbonne with a master on artificial intelligence and lectures in philosophy at the Freie Universität in Berlin. He studied also at the University of Marburg, as well as in Harvard, and holds degrees in both law and philosophy. Thank you, Wolfgang, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm unmuted, I hope. So thank you very much for this kind welcome and a very kind introduction, Olaf. It was very appreciated. It was very long. Basically, I did a lot of postings like you do in the Foreign Service, and now I'm in New York, but I was already here the last 2 years in my previous role as basically cyber ambassador of Germany. It's snowing outside if I look out of my window, and there's snow on the ground, and we talked about that before, but I think it's melting times in the transatlantic relations now. I've been here in the last 2 years, and it's kind of a frostier global climate, and we hope that actually this will change very soon. I think it's urgently needed because we have basically a global conflict coming, and I'm actually grateful for the outgoing administration that they pointed into that direction. It's the challenge of China. China is a competitor for the values we, the West, actually stand for. China is economically successful. They offer a model that gives a lot of people in the third world and in a lot of countries hope for economic success, but the values are different. It's not the values of freedom, of liberty that we share in the West. So we have to be aware, especially because they are successful. There is a global competition coming from China, and we have to react this. The Trump administration did this, but they did this in a way which basically was not always the best way to incorporate or cooperate with Europeans on that. And I think even the US, a strong country, a country I admire very much, is not strong enough for such a global competition, or at least it would be easier if we could basically close the ranks between the Western countries, between the countries who believe in the same values of liberty and market economy, basically. So I think that's my big hope for the new administration, that we will be able to cooperate better on that to face this challenge. And there are more challenges than that. China is only one. I think there are other countries in the world where we have to be aware that they don't share our values. So, and also with China, I will come to that a little bit later. There are areas where we can cooperate, but we also have to be very clear in areas where we don't have the same values. In other areas, of course, we have to acknowledge that China did a great job of bringing people out of poverty, and it is a major trading partner for us. And in the US, if I look at my Amazon deliveries, and I do this voluntarily, I would say 60–70% are actually made in China. So it's not about a conflict which is all or nothing. It's more to identify the areas where you can cooperate globally and keep markets open globally, and other areas where you have to see that you don't share the values and where you have to stand up for your values. Together, the European Union and the US have only 10% of the world populations, but we have about a third of all world trade flows. So it's a huge area taken together. So what precisely do I hope will work better now in the new administration, the incoming administration, and what justifies my hope of a kind of melting period in the transatlantic relations? Let me start with trade. I think we have hope that some of the basically, well, not the tariffs, but the sanctions justified with security concerns will not be implemented, so this threat will go away. Quite frankly, I never understood why car exports of Mercedes or BMW to the US could pose a security risk to the US, in particular when a lot of those cars are produced in factories in the US. So threatening Europe with economic sanctions based on security concerns was not the smartest move. Also, tariffs on steel and aluminum, even so mainly directed towards China, have a kind of bad effect on the European-US cooperation as well. So I think we have to deal with these issues first and find a new basic understanding. I don't think that the TTIP, the transatlantic trade, basically area, common trade area, that was under discussion a couple of years ago, that this will come back very soon, because Biden administration also, and we're quite clear about that, will have a very American workers, American industry focused trade agenda. But I think we can at least look where we could create a win-win situation between Europe and the US to prosper together. And I think that's one chance. But the main challenge, I think, will be to cooperate better on the issue that is key for the future of our economies and the future actually of our population's success. And that's the digital area. We have to face challenges like cyber attacks together. This, by the way, we already did under the previous administration a lot. We cooperated very closely in a group of like-minded Western countries led by the US, but also with strong engagement by a couple of European countries, but also by Asian countries and Australia, New Zealand. And in the European Union, we introduced a cyber sanctions regime to react to cyber attacks. And we implemented that cyber sanction regimes in the case of cyber attacks where we identified that they were coming from countries like China, like Russia, like North Korea, like couple of other countries. So we imposed sanctions to the people and the organizations behind these cyber attacks, sanctions, financial sanctions, but also travel restrictions. So we have this regime and we cooperated there very, very closely. We also did something what I would call a name and shame approach to that. So basically, if you drag these actors into the open, you make it impossible for them to act behind the scenes like they did before. So that's also a success. But we also have to do more. We have to now, I think, a chance to move together on a whole range of digital issues. The EU Commission just presented their drafts a couple of days ago for the Digital Service Act and for the Digital Market Act. And it's not directed against American companies, even though it will affect American companies a lot, but it's very much in the same line of thinking what I observed here in the US in the last, I would say, 6 to 12 months, that there is this understanding that you have to find a balance between creating companies that could basically advance progress in the digital field, but at the same time that you have to be careful that you don't strangle competition and don't strangle new companies from startups from rising up and bringing new fresh ideas, because you have dominant market players, you have gateways that basically keep the keys to the digital market in their hands. So all this is the idea of the Digital Market Act, and the Digital Service Act actually tries to also deal with issues like how you implement legislation, rules, lawful behavior in the cyberspace, and who's responsible for that. There's a lot of parallel thinking in the US. There's still a little bit more now. The US are trying to do more with antitrust laws, which the European Union tried. We had these big antitrust procedures against Google and Microsoft and a couple of other companies, but honestly, they didn't change much. So I think the European way of thinking about these issues is we have to move now forward and look for smarter ways to regulate the digital market, the digital world, so that fair competition could take place. Once again, this is not directed against the US or any other countries, and it would be great if we could basically start very soon talks between the European Union and the US to progress on that. This includes also issues on data protection and privacy, but there actually I think it is much more difficult to have a common understanding, because the philosophy, the thinking on both sides of the Atlantic is quite different. I think we have a different understanding, and that is behind this so-called Trump 2 judgment, basically, which prevents companies to store data from European citizens in the US or in other jurisdictions which don't have the same level of data protection as we have in Europe. And I understand that for security reasons, the US sees it very difficult to implement the same privacy protection in the US. So this is one of the fields where we have to talk more transatlantic-wise, and where I don't see the solution at the moment, but even there is a rapprochement. If you look at data protection initiatives in California, and I think 19 other states following suit, there is a lot of movement on the American side, and the whole thing, it goes further. I think it's also clear that we are dealing, this digital revolution is still ongoing and is still new. So we basically here in uncharted territory. And whereas governments normally in the past had mainly the task not to lose the advantages or basically to safeguard the achievements of the previous generations of politicians, nowadays the politicians are faced with a totally new world. Not only with COVID, which is a good example for that as well, where we have unprecedented global plague that the generations before us had never to face, but also with this digital revolution, it is something new where we have to find new ways to deal with this completely new way of doing business, this complete new way of interacting, the complete new way of doing Rotary Club meetings. And I think there we have still to find our ways. And I'm very hopeful that we can do this together with our friends here in the US. Last, do you still hear me? Because I have.
Oh, absolutely, of course.
Okay, perfect. Okay, last point, security. That's probably the weakest point, speaking from a European perspective. We know we relied a lot on the US on security issues, and this is probably the area where we needed a wake-up call, I think. And I think the wake-up call is understood, even though threatening NATO and the basis of the foundation of transatlantic cooperation and security partnership is maybe or was not the smartest move. I think we now have a chance to find a better way to cooperate even in this area. And we're clear that this also means more efforts by Europeans, by Germany in particular, but also by other countries. And as you see in the discussion inside Europe between France and Germany, we're already doing this. A different way to do this and how we want to do it. There are also inner European small differences between France and Germany, as example, who have a slightly different concept of approaching this. But for us Europeans, that's not something new. We will approach that. There's one fundamental, I think, issue which we have to discuss seriously is what do we understand in security? Is it only military security, or do we have a broader approach? Is it also contribution to security if we stabilize a country by building bridges or water holes or something like this? Does it stabilize a country? Does it prevent extremism from spreading? So doing it in a smart way and in a comprehensive way, I think that's also one way we can do it wiser than today. So taking all this together, I think that is just 3 areas, basically trade, digitalization, cyber, and the third one, security, where I think we have a good chance to restart the transatlantic relations. And I think we definitely need to do this because as I said in the beginning, we're facing enormous challenges. We're facing basically systematic challenges, and this is new. The win of the West, or the Fukuyama thesis from the end of basically the global competition, and there's only one way of thinking. I think that hasn't proven as wrong, has proven as wrong because there is a competing model, and a model that is very attractive for a lot of countries in the world. And if we want to prevail with our values, I think we have to stay together. I will leave it here and think we should enter a discussion, and I'm happy to answer and talk about these subjects even more when you're interested, or answer other questions you may have. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Deputy Consul. Vielen herzlichen Dank. Die erste Frage kommt von unserem Präsidenten, Gerard.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Deputy Consul, I had a question. What would you suggest right now would be the one best way for the United States and the allies to rebuild the NATO alliance? Were you able to? Okay.
Yeah, I think to engage in the reform process that has already started. There was a discussion group, a think tank group, basically, who made some proposals how to make NATO fit for future challenges. So I think this would be the best starting point. That means challenges like you understand me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
So challenges like this, like cyber wars that are coming, and where we have to prepare for hybrid threats, information warfare, threatening of election processes, etc., etc. So we have a whole lot of new challenges. When we go a bit further, we enter into challenges to encryption by quantum computing and things like that. So there's a whole new world out there. And if you look at how countries like Russia act, you know, they not challenges us so much with tanks or even with nuclear weapons anymore. I mean, the challenge is still there. I'm not forgetting it, but they basically, they look for weaknesses in the West, and wherever they see a weakness, they exploit it. That's what happened in the elections 2016. Fortunately, it didn't happen in the elections 2020 here. This happens permanently. You have the Navalny case in Germany that poisoned their adversaries. This is unacceptable behavior, but it's just below the threshold of where NATO traditionally was active. And I think this is a key challenge. It's a challenge where we have to react in a smart way. And this is where we should, I think, focus our attention. And if we find a common answer to those threats and stick together to that, I think this will strengthen the alliance and at the same time prepare it for future. Then with the budget issues, of course, we can talk about that, but that follows for me out of the first question or my first part of the answer, because if we identify future challenges, then we also know where we have to put the money into and what and how much money we actually need to counter challenges.
Thank you, Consul. We have a very polite raise of hand from Dr. George Onuora. Dr. George?
Thank you so much for this very wonderful presentation. My question is this: in the universe of globalism that we live in right now, how much does cyber insecurity worry you?
I think it's a major challenge. I mean, I don't want to overdo it because normally we're safe, but there are two threats of it. One is stealing intellectual property. That undermines the fundamentals of our economic system, basically. If your intellectual property is not protected, you have no incentive to develop new stuff. Look, just as the vaccines, you know, the money that a lot of companies, including the German company BioNTech, put into developing that vaccine. Companies will only do this in the future if they're rewarded, that they have an advantage if they are successful. They take the risks, they take the money in their hand, they will be rewarded. If somebody steals it, if this is not protected, at the cyber world, you can steal a lot. You don't have to steal physical things. You can do it remotely from the other side of the earth. Then this will undermine our whole economic system. So this is one of the major threats. The other threat is more directed at the political area or towards our societies. If you use this, the digital world to spread misinformation, if you undermine elections, if you put out sensitive information about politicians or just normal people in the net, and basically takes them out from competing in political contests, you undermine the principles of democracy, you undermine the values on which we stand. So that, to do it short, I think that these two areas of where cyber threats are relevant, one is the economic area, the second one is the basically the undermining democratic societies. You could also imagine the military world, and there are examples of that, and there are also attacks on industrial chemical plants, as example, and you can actually kill people also through the cyber world in theory. But I see this only as a secondary threat, because there you still have kinetic, old-fashioned weapons or explosive devices. If you want to do this, there is not the particular advantage. But in the economic area, in the economic competition, and in the competition for the minds of the people of the world. I think their cyber is at the moment more dangerous than in this military or creating catastrophes scenarios.
Thank you.
Grace, I'm going to take the question from Christina Piakowska about Nord Stream.
Yes, go ahead, Christina.
Christina, unmute yourself. Well, I'll ask the question then. Deputy Counsel, the question was that you didn't discuss Nord Stream 2 when you had a discussion about security. Do you think that the pipeline will expose Europe to danger?
I don't think it will, but I understand there is probably a communication problem. We have to communicate better. I see, and I can see both sides working in the US, and basically having been in the US in the last year quite often, and being a European, being a German. From our perspective, this is part of the diversification of our energy resources. Germany doesn't have energy resources on our own. The resources we have in the North Sea, or that our British or Norwegian friends have, are diminishing. So we will become more and more dependent on other sources. So our interest is that this is not one source, that we not import all our oil and gas from the Middle East or from North Africa, also very unstable regions, that we get, or from Iran, to name it, that we have a diversification. Yes, Russia is a complicated partner, I see that, but so far it has been reliable. The deliveries have always been reliable, and from our perspective, also Russia depends on the money they get basically for the gas deliveries more than we depend on the gas that we get from them, because for us it's only one source to get the gas, the energy. We have multiple energies. It's also transition technology, because ultimately we will get more and more renewable energies in our own country. So for the transition period, it's good to diversify, and Russia is one part of the puzzle. It's not the whole game. Whereas Russia basically get the majority of their income comes from selling natural resources. The Russian industry is not really competitive on the world markets, in a lot of few exceptions, but in general. So the dependency, you could see it also this way. I see, of course, a point that it is that there's a different view in the US. I see that. So I think what we need to do is talk more about that and understand each other's position, and then try to find a way to accommodate that. I think that is doable, and I think we're also interested in increasing the import of US liquefied gas. Basically, we're building new terminals. There are companies doing that. I heard just one company got delayed or didn't make the progress we hoped for, but that was an individual commercial decision. So if it's competitive, we're very much interested also to import more liquefied gas, as example, from the US as part of this diversification strategy. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Andreas, you want to ask the question from Johnny Walker?
Yes, or we could ask our friend John to unmute himself. I understand that the previous attendee had a problem unmuting herself. John, do you want to ask the question?
Yes, thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you very much for being here. Wie geht's? Ich spreche Deutsch langsam und klein.
It's okay, danke, ich verstehe es.
So my question it's kind of hard to write. I'm the president of an early stage technology company that we're working on technology that works, that is GDPR compliant, free from the cloud, that gives us better cybersecurity. I guess my question really is, what paths forward do you see for smaller, because you mentioned competition as part of the issue. You have a lot of innovation with these smaller companies like mine that can compete with, say, China and Russia, and protect our way of life and be GDPR compliant and respect personal data. What paths forward do you see that companies like mine can take to protect ourselves from these larger companies that either A, block us from presenting our newer technologies, or B, bury them before they even make it to market?
Depends very much which part of the industry you're in. In cybersecurity, I think there's still opportunity because the threat landscape is developing and changing very rapidly. So if you have a product that is basically particularly designed to upcoming threats or new threats, I think you have an easy chance to get into the market. And as you've seen just develop in the last few weeks, a big company in cybersecurity like FireEye, got hacked as well. They've been very transparent about this, which is good. So while normally it is, even in cybersecurity, it's an advantage if you have a certain scale. And if you look state actors and also defensive state actors like our agencies, we cooperate very closely with some of the key market players in this area because they have the information, they constantly monitor threat landscapes. But it's still, in the end, it's a smart company that in these areas win. I see that there is a lot of kind of exchange. As one lead country, I would say that's Israel, actually, on cybersecurity issues. They have excellent fairs, actually, where all the major players are present worldwide, basically. And they also have a very interesting industry, particularly because they have a lot of people coming from the army, from the military, and then basically going into private business. So there it actually is working. On the more general digital economy, beyond cybersecurity issues, it's harder because there you don't react to threats. You basically build up a business model. And once one business model becomes dominant, then becomes difficult for new market entries. That's why the Digital Market Act actually tries to basically set up rules when you have a dominant position in a market, and you're basically also one of the major access points to the market for other companies, like prime examples, of course, Amazon, who doesn't only sell products through their platform, they also offer their platform for third-party sellers. So Amazon is a competitor, and at the same time, the main platform those third-party sellers use. So there you have to set new rules. And the EU now, with this Digital Market Act, stepped there forward and tries for the first time worldwide, at least for the EU area, to establish rules for those companies, so that this is not ending up in a transatlantic economic battle. I think we have to talk with the US very soon about how we can coordinate it, how it becomes clear that this is basically a general approach shared on both economies and not directed against players from one market or the other. I think the time for doing that is very good because the discussion in the US has gained ground. There are more and more people who see that it's not good for your own economy if you have only one or two dominant players, and which prevents smaller companies from coming up and rising up. By the way,
Thank you very much.
This is not something new. I mean, I read don't know if anybody of you read the book, The Great Game, which is about the oil business and how the oil business basically grew up. And then Standard Oil became so successful that they prevented new competitors from getting market share or getting even a foothold in the market. And it ended up with basically, as we all know, with breaking up Standard Oil into several companies. So sometimes you have to basically act, the state has to act so that the market could function.
Thank you.
Danke.
We have a question from Mary Anderson, who accidentally happened to have been our guest speaker very successfully so last week. Mary, would you like to pose your question?
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I would like to ask, has Germany been a victim of Russian hacking? And if so, how has the Chancellor of Germany dealt with this?
We have been a victim of Russian hacking. We have been a victim of several other hacker groups. The most two prominent attacks were one on the German Bundestag, the German parliament, which was hacked. The documents were basically stolen. And the other one was actually affected the Foreign Office, my basically ministry. In both cases, we condemned this. In the case of the Bundestag and the the German Foreign Office, we imposed sanctions on the group behind. One group was called APT 28. APT stands for Advanced Persistent Threats. And we think we're pretty sure that there is a Russian state organization behind that, and there were sanctions against this organization, so, and against individuals from this organization. So their assets, as far as they have them in the European Union, have been frozen, and there is an entry ban. So these individuals are not allowed to travel to Europe anymore. So there is a reaction in addition to, of course, a condemnation, but there are really physical sanctions. There's one principle, and this is a good example for that: bad behavior in cyberspace must have consequences. You can agree on principles as long as you want, as long as you don't impose consequences on perpetrators. This won't work. People don't stick to principles. Bad actors don't stick to principles if you don't react. And in this case and in other cases, we acted. We could only do this because we're part of the EU, we're part of a strong group, and we also had the support from basically like-minded countries beyond the EU, like Australia, New Zealand, the US, who very much supported the acting of the European Union in this case.
Thank you so much. We currently don't actually have another question, but I got a nice email earlier on from what I believe to be also a German fellow, Wolfgang Türk. Wolfgang, do you want to pose a question? I give you the privilege of a question that you don't even have to find yet. How do you like that?
Well, good evening. I'm not a German fellow, I'm an Austrian.
There you go.
So,
Servus.
Neighboring country. Good evening. Well, nice to be here at this place. It's very interesting to have this discussion from the other side of the ocean. And well, it's the first time for me to have to be visiting an American Rotary Club via Zoom.
Would you like to ask the question to the Consul? Maybe you have something between relationships, Austria, Germany, or anything else that is on your mind? Why not?
Well, I think the relationships between Austria and Germany are quite good at the moment. But what is your view on the European Union as you are working in the States now?
I think the European Union is always misunderstood, I think, or a lot of time misunderstood. It's not about creating unity, and you can't in that regard compare them with the US, where it's always about basically presenting a unified US, basically. I think that will not happen in Europe so soon. It's always trying to find compromises. And this is much harder to sell. It's, say it this way, it's not sexy. It's difficult to explain, but it's much better in what we had in Europe before. We had these wars between European nations. So compared with that, the current situation, if people only argue in conference rooms or need an extra week or an extra month or sometimes extra year to come to a solution, I think that is great civilitarian progress and a big achievement. So that's the first thing. The second misunderstanding with the EU is, I think the success of the EU doesn't lie in decision-making or even imposing policy. If you look at the amount of, the European Union doesn't have a unified army in that sense. They have no real police force in that sense. So it's not a nation state in that sense, and you can't compare it with a country like the US or with, I don't know, Mexico or whatever, or Canada, you know. But so the value lies in basically bringing politics of a lot of countries who then have to impose them individually together. And this is not only done by decision-making, it's also by creating opportunities. Creating of opportunities for people to meet and exchange ideas. So my experience in these 30-something years I work on this subject is that for me, the value in the EU lies alone that people meet. You know, when I go to Brussels, I I have to meet my colleagues from other countries. I also have to meet those colleagues who I know who have a different opinion or who come from a country who has a different opinion. So I have to listen to their opinion. I'm forced to listen to these other opinions. And these constantly basically being confronted with other opinions is valuable. If you compare it with the US, you don't have that so much in politics, but it is like you're suddenly forced not only to listen to CNN or Fox News, but you're forced to listen to both, basically. So the commentators from Fox News have to go to present their views to the CNN audience and the other way around. So this is a bit like how the EU works. And I am deeply convinced this creates, not immediately, this creates a better understanding of each other. And in the end, you find compromise, you find solution, but it takes long. And very often these compromises are messy, but I prefer messy compromises to unified solutions where you only take half of the population, half of the people with you.
Thank you. Olaf has a question.
Yeah, Wolfram, thank you so much. Maybe you mentioned the Navalny case. So first the question, can you shed a bit more light on this from the German perspective?
Sorry, I didn't understand it.
So you mentioned the Navalny case,
yeah.
the poisoning of Navalny. So if possible, could you shed a bit more light on that? And my question is, what must happen that the European Union will act a bit more harsh to this kind of, let me say it politely, development or situation? Because we had several incidents, or we had some other cases in the UK a couple of years ago.
Well, there were sanctions also in the other case, in the Skripal case, but they come normally with a time delay, so there are consequences. To be frank, will we go to war? No, because it doesn't help anybody and it doesn't solve it. Even Navalny, my understanding is, doesn't ask for something like this. So what can you do, you know, in the world we live? I think the Chancellor and the administration has been pretty clear about that, you know, and there is a recent report in the US CNN, but together with Der Spiegel and a couple of other newspapers who basically delivered proof who is actually, they named those people who are behind them. Not against those people, but against some of their superiors are already European sanctions in place because of their involvement in other cases. So there's little more you can do. But what is clear, it is clear that there is it's a clear, well, I wouldn't say breaking point, but it became even more obvious that there are things going on that are unacceptable. And I think we have made this clear and we will continue to make it clear, and that will have an effect on the relation. It will cool down the relations even more. And my understanding is that that's already been perceived in Russia, that there's also a shift away on trying to basically focus on Germany. So they will try to focus on other countries, but you have to continue. That's, I think, one of the truths in international relations in general. You can condemn things and you have to condemn things and you have to be very clear about that and you have to impose consequences, but with proportionality. But in the end, you still have to live with them. The countries, you can't make these countries disappear, and that doesn't work. So it's the same true for China or other countries. You always have to look at the whole and you have to see where you could cooperate and where you have to be more careful and where you have to stop cooperating. It will never be an either or. It will always be a solution that is adequate to the particular situation. And there are consequences, but they are not, of course, the consequences of war or peace, luckily.
Okay, thank you. May I change gears a bit and shift something to the economic forum, so to speak. So going back from cybersecurity to
Sure.
the outlook of the expectation from the German side regarding the new president, which is coming to the United States, and from there, so what do you think? What is the German perception of that?
I think we have no illusion that the Biden administration will do an America first policy. but will be an America first and not America only policy. And I understand this, and I think this is something where we can talk. So I think the difference will be that we have a partner with whom we can talk openly about our differences and then find solutions, and where there's an interest to work together. And if you look at the first decisions from the Biden administration, a lot is going towards basically Europe. There's an open view. Biden knows Europe very well. We know Biden very well. By the way, he is very Irish in his thinking and his public appearances, which is my wife, as an Irish diplomat, is very happy about. So there are European connections, European roots. And I think he understood that we can exactly face those threats. You mentioned Navalny, Russia, Iran, China, I mentioned, all these threats in the world we can only face if the world is like I just described a moment ago in the Navalny case. If the world is like that, the only way we can act and the best we can do is if we act together, basically. But acting together means not that the US is doing something and then the rest of the Western world has to follow. It means that we have to discuss what is the best way to proceed, and also about how we see the world. And I think with Biden and with his administration, we have partners in the US with whom we can talk. And I think he has partners in the EU to talk about. Also, by the way, not only the threat landscape, we will also face other problems. What do we do with the economic stimulus? There's a lot of debt created now. How do we, states responsible, react to that? It's also not that we end up in a currency war, as example, between Western countries. So that's another issue we need to talk about, and we find common answers to that. You know, how do we strengthen our currencies as reserve, global reserve currencies? You know, when there is the renminbi gaining ground in this area. So there are a lot of economic issues where we can talk about together.
Thank you so much. Before we pass the word to President Gerard for additional questions or remarks, I would like to ask one question myself. I followed, of course, growing up in Südtirol, the politics of Germany very closely, and you know, the chancellors that always stood out are Willy Brandt, Walter Scheel, Helmut Schmidt, Helmut Kohl, you name them. How would you say history books will portray Angela Merkel in hindsight? Where will she rank amongst all those very high-profile German politicians?
Can I just ask where you're from in Südtirol?
Meran.
Oh, okay, yeah. Nice, very nice.
Yeah, beautiful.
I have good friends in Brixen, so.
Yeah, that's where my father is from.
The closer, that's where I skied quite often.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, I make a confession, you know, let's say this way, I did not always vote for Merkel, yeah? So I also see alternatives, but I have to admit, it's a great blessing for Germany. First of all, it helped with reunification to cement it, you know, it was good after a reunification have been perceived by a lot, rightly or wrongly, and that's a discussion for another time, by basically takeover of East Germany by West Germany. So to counter this, the best you could do is having a chancellor from East Germany. So that's what Merkel is in the first place. So this is the first thing. Second thing is her systematic approach. You know, she's in her heart, she's a scientist. She's very fact-based, and she seldomly gets emotionally. So I think that's also very good trait, and it's fitted into the time because we have more uncertainty in today's world. And if you don't know how to deal with uncertainty, the two ways, either you go into ideology, into politics of emotions, basically, or you go to a politics of facts and a more scientific-based approach. I'm not in favor for handing over political decision to scientists, but I think you need to base your politics in science. And she represented that. So I think these two elements on a more abstract level. On a concrete level, I think she will be remembered for a courageous decision with the refugees to leave 1 million refugees in, which is enormous, which was a decision born out of the situation, which brought her a lot of criticism. But in the end, I think it did the country well. not in this wave, but do not forget that the founders of BioNTech are also immigrants. So it has an effect on the country as a whole. It changed Germany as a whole. And I think she will be also remembered as one of the big persons in the European Union, not like predecessors who had a more, I would say, a grandstanding, but as basically a deal maker behind the scenes. So I think this is what will go down in history books.
Thank you so much, President Gerard.
Yeah, Deputy Consul, interesting you mentioned, that the Chancellor is from the former Eastern Germany. So let me pick up from that segue to a question. Of course, in the United States, we have our own problems with the far right. I like to call them our native Taliban, American Taliban. But there is, of course, the same kind of problem in primarily, I think, from the former Eastern German part of Germany, and Wolfgang also in Austria with the, Ausländeraußen. And how much of a threat do you think this actually poses to normalcy in Germany? And how do you think the average German views these people from the right?
I think it is a threat, clearly. And the interesting thing you said is it's kind of an international development. It's interesting. It's almost an oxymoron, a contradiction itself. You have international movement of nationalists, that can't work well. But I think that also hints that there is an underlying ground behind it. And I think that's globalization. Globalization has been highly successful, and people like me, and probably majority of you, benefited from it. We like the world we live in. We like the interchange. Rotary clubs are all around the world. They incorporate this principle even before globalization was a term. So you're on the forefront of this. But we have to see that there are a lot of people basically left behind. The people in the core, I think everybody needs some kind of identity, in German, we say it's a Heimat, basically, the feeling where you feel at ease. And I think the main thing behind a lot of these movements, not all of that, and it would be too simple to explain it in one way or the other, but one of the core things that a lot of people feel left behind. They feel this modern world, this global world is for others, but not for them, so they're left behind. So what we can do, and I think that's a decisive question also, how big the threat will be, is how do we get these people in? How do we incorporate them in? And I was recently in a discussion with compared populism in the US and Germany. And it was based on basically studies. And the study found it's particularly strong in areas economically left behind, but even more relevant was basically that the state didn't act as providing basic services to people. So I think there's a lot countries can do. In Germany, it is a threat. You said it's mainly from East Germany. There is a strong tendency in East Germany, which has to do with this feeling of being lost in this new world, which West Germany probably has easier to adapt. But it's also in West Germany. And last thing, there's also a dangerous threat coming from Muslim immigrants. I wouldn't blame them exclusively, but you have to see it's diverse. If you look at anti-Semitism as example, it's native born, it's German anti-Semitism, and that's what we traditionally known and face and fight against. And it's a core, actually, I would even say raison d'etre for Germany to overcome this. But suddenly we have also, with these immigrants, not all the immigrants have Western democratic values. So you have to also see how you deal with that. It's a lot of challenges at the same time. As I said before, and hopefully became clear, I'm in favor for immigration. I think overall it's beneficial, but you don't have to be naive on these issues. You also have to see how to immigrate them. And that's, by the way, a little bit we can learn from the US probably, because in the end, the US is still a beacon of hope for immigrants the world around, because you manage to integrate quite a lot into your society.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Good answer. Andreas?
Yes, I don't know if we have any more questions. I would certainly give the last question privilege to the founder of these international meetings, Joseph Clay, who is obviously German. Joseph, would you like to address the Consul this evening? We always so appreciative when you show. You have to unmute yourself, Joseph. Sorry. One second. Joseph, we can't hear you.
Yeah. Lower,
Now,
Joseph, lower left-hand corner, unmute yourself.
So now can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. It was really an excellent meeting, and it sets, I think, for the Rotary Club, new standards how to conduct meetings, and in particular the discussion. If I may ask a very provocative question, it's perhaps to a touchy issue for a German diplomat, but what is the role at the moment of our former Chancellor, Gerhard Schröder? What is his role vis-a-vis and friendship with Putin? And of course, somehow it relates to security issues. Thank you and have a great evening.
thanks. He's a private citizen, and we personally, I would be very grateful for him that he kept us out of the war in Iraq, which I consider a big mistake from a Western perspective. And he created a lot of terrorism worldwide. And luckily he had the courage, and there was a lot of courage at that time, to stand up against close allies and say, we agree with you on a lot of things, but not on this one, and we don't participate there. So this is his historical achievement. Second achievement is he's remembered also for being one of the fathers of an economic reform program, the so-called Hartz reform, which basically brought Germany out of a basically stalemate and created new economic dynamic, which was really needed and is the source of the economic success that Germany had in the last 2 decades, I almost would say. This all said is, I think there's a lot of criticism, and right criticism, on him, on his behavior in the last, after he basically retired. He became chairperson, I think, of Gazprom. He's always been an advocate of good German-Russian relations. And as I said earlier, you have to see these relations in a greater context, basically. And it's important just from geography that you have good relations. If you see how many Russians live in Berlin and how many Germans actually have economic or other relations to Russia, then I think we should be also grateful that he kept good relations. But now in the situation when we have clear cases that are not acceptable, to defend those cases, you can't go along with that, and you have to criticize him. The good thing, he was heavily criticized not only abroad, but also inside Germany and also within his own party. So basically, that's it. It didn't make the international headlines, this discussion inside Germany, because in the end, he's not relevant anymore because he's a privatier. He retired, basically. So whatever he does is not anymore related to the current German government or even to the Social Democratic Party, who still is in government. He has no influence there anymore. That's a good thing.
Thank you so much, Consul. I just wanted to say, you have given a perfect presentation, just like Germany stands for perfection. As an episode, I just would like an anecdote. I would tell you that my father always, and his entire life, always insisted on putting his foot only on Lufthansa flights. So he never flew a different plane. That's besides the point. I passed the word one last second, maybe to our chair of the evening. Olaf, would you like to wrap something up? You got us this wonderful speaker, and we're so proud to have you in our club. And then, of course, Gerard, our president, will wrap up.
Oh, I think there's nothing to add. Thank you so much, Wolfram. I think we can continue this, and I'm certainly sure we will invite you again. And I've learned a lot tonight, and I know you can speak almost about every topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Olaf, for arranging that. It was really a pleasure. It was a great pleasure, particularly the discussion. It was one of the most vivid discussions I had in recent times. And I can tell you, normally these Zoom meetings get a little bit boring, but this was not one of those because it was very vivid. I was very happy to be here. To say the new measure of time, I think we talked for about 1 inch of snowfall, if I judge from my
Yeah, I think so.
And the last thing, I'm going home on Friday, by the way, not on Lufthansa, but on British Airways, because my office has to say, if it's good Germans, we have to save money, but I come back on Lufthansa. So I've come back with Lufthansa, and I personally like them a lot. It's a great airline, so fly with them. But I wish you all a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, or Happy Holidays is so neutral, so I rather name them individually, and a good start in the new year, which we all hope will be better in a lot of aspects than this year. So I think we all deserve this, deserve a break also, and I'm happy. If you like to have me again, then I'm happy to come back again. Thank you very much, and keep up the international spirit which you have in your club. Actually, that's very good.
Very good, very good.
So much.
Namaste, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you everyone for participating tonight. Olaf, a special thank you to you for arranging this for us. Much appreciated. Deputy Consul General, vielen Dank für alles. I will tell you that one of my very closest friends is head of cybersecurity for the United States Army. And I promise you, hopefully by the summer, maybe, depending on how we do with COVID, we can sit down and share a good time at the Union League Club, and I'll introduce the two of you to each other. I'm sure he would.
It would be lovely.
He would love to meet you, and I think you would benefit by meeting him as well. So we will keep that. We'll put it in our appointment book, and I'll contact you. Hopefully by the summer we'll be able to do this. We'll see. We don't know. But thank you anyway, everyone, for participating tonight. I remind you that we're not resting over the holiday. We are going to have one of the major candidates for mayor of New York City the first week of January. The second week of January, we're going to have Families for Safe Streets addressing the issue of street safety for pedestrians and traffic in New York City with recommendations for a change in the law. I will also tell you that the Commissioner of the Police Department of the City of New York has agreed to work with Rotary Club of New York, and we're going to institute a series of community-based meetings between the Police Department of New York City and different communities of the city to begin a dialogue, a negotiation, a discussion. I think we all agree it's something that's absolutely necessary for the people of the city and the police to sit down and talk to each other. And so we will have the honor and the privilege of initiating these discussions citywide. So that will also be in February. So we've got a huge agenda ahead of us, and wishing everyone a happy holiday. We're still in the Hanukkah season. Merry Christmas. If you celebrate Kwanzaa, Happy New Year. So Deputy Consul, fröhliche Weihnachten und ein gutes Neujahr. And vielen Dank für alles.
Thank you.
Gute Nacht.
Thank you. Good night.
Very good. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you.
Namaste and good night.
Good night. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being with us tonight.